Miracle Worker. It's the specialization that is focused around techie solutions. Therefore, it's often used to enhance your ship's existing abilities, whether those being damage output or its ability to heal itself. Miracle Worker has a variety of unique features compared to other ship specializations, which means it's pretty good for some things, but also means it has some pretty weird drawbacks in other areas. Now, like with the rest of the series, I'm going to start with the ship specialization mechanic, which in this case for Miracle Worker is the innovation mechanic. How this works is basically you have several different abilities that this thing can trigger, actually. It's entirely randomly generated, which is interesting. It sets it apart by a long shot from the other specializations, but can be kind of frustrating because you never know what ability you're going to get next, so it's not something that can be heavily relied on. How it works is that there are 6 different innovation effects, again, that are completely chosen at random. I'll put the 6 different effects here on the screen right now. The first one is called Instinctive Rerouting, which gives you a bonus to all subsystem power levels. So you get that, and then all your subsystem power levels will go up. The next one is Containment Layering, which gives you temporary hull based off of your maxed hull. The next one is called Containment Layering, which gives you a amount of temporary hull that's based off of your maximum hull. And then Heisenberg Decouplers, which is basically the same thing, but for shields. So you get an amount of secondary shielding based off of your max shields. Then there is Plasma Conduit Purge, which is a self-targeting plasma dot AoE. So basically it'll send out a wave of plasma around your ship, and anything caught within the wave will receive a plasma damage over time effect. Next is Ingenious Solutions, which gives a recharge bonus to your bridge officer abilities and captain's abilities, which if you've already got ways to lower the cooldowns of your bridge officers, that's not going to make a huge amount of difference. But the lowered cooldowns on your captain's abilities, that can be kind of helpful. There aren't a lot of ways to lower those abilities, so that can be kind of nice. And the last ability is the Barclay Maneuver, which will create a photonic copy of your starship, have it use ramming speed at a nearby enemy foe. Now, like I said, these effects are selected entirely randomly, and how you activate them is also kind of similarly random. How you do it is it's sort of like a dumbed down version of Simon Says. You get a sequence of 3 symbols here, with each of which will represent your bridge officer abilities. So here we've got red, yellow, which that is tactical, engineering. So what I have to do is activate a tactical ability, and another tactical ability, and then an engineering ability. And that triggers the effect. Now the effect will reboot. Once this cooldown is completed, then it will generate another effect and have a completely different sequence of bridge officer abilities. Like I said, the sequence is always randomly chosen, but will always consist of at least one engineering, tactical, or science ability. It can be any one of those classes, but it has to be just from the basic tactical, engineering, or science classes for your bridge officers. Now, aside from the specialization mechanic, there are some other unique features that can be found on Miracle Worker ships, one of which is a universal console slot. Now, obviously, the ship is already upgraded to Tier 6 X2, so it's going to have 2 extra universal console slots, but it also has one original universal console slot already built into the ship because it is a Miracle Worker ship, meaning that Miracle Worker ships, full Miracle Worker ships, that's the ones with the innovation mechanic and a full commander level Miracle Worker seat, they will always have an additional console slot, giving them a total of 12 console slots instead of the usual 11 that most other Tier 6 ships have. Now, I know the recently released Federation Hollow ship that was released for this year's summer event, that also comes with a universal console slot without being a full Miracle Worker ship, but that is a very unique case, so I wouldn't expect that to become a norm throughout the rest of the game. So that's mostly going to be a feature you're only going to see on Miracle Worker ships. But apparently now the Federation Hollow ship is going to be an exception to that rule. But I wouldn't expect to see many more exceptions to that rule, if any. The way universal console slots work is that you can put any type of console in them, whereas the other type of console slots, they can only use either the one that they're named after. So like engineering console slots could only use engineering consoles or universal consoles, whereas universal console slots can use universal, engineering, tactical, or science in them. So it's basically just a free console slot that you can put anything in as long as it's a console. A less obvious perk that Miracle Worker ships get is that they also come with extra power. Most Tier 6 ships only get a plus 20 bonus to their power levels that can be randomly distributed throughout any of the subsystems, but Miracle Worker ships get plus 30 in total. So they get a little bit of extra power in their subsystems compared to other Tier 6 ships. which frankly isn't a huge difference in comparison to other ships, but it's something. Lastly, American Works ships also come with the cyclical quantum slipstream drive, which is a unique version of the quantum slipstream drive that lasts longer than the standard version and has a lower cooldown than the standard version of slipstream drive, meaning that this will be very helpful in doing Tour of the Galaxy runs if that's something that you're doing. Now let's move on to the bridge officer seating. There are 3 different abilities in the American Worker specialization that will have some effect on a damage buff for your weapons. The first one is narrow sensor bands, and this is probably one of the most commonly used bridge officer abilities in the American Worker specialization. What it does is it will give you a bonus damage buff to all of your energy weapons that will scale based on your distance to your target. In addition, it'll also increase your accuracy rating and make you immune to confuse and placate abilities. This can be pretty nice. I mean, the bonus damage alone is actually pretty powerful, but the problem with this one is that it only lasts for about 10 seconds and has a rather long cooldown timer. Like if you look at this narrow sensor bands, yeah, with this setup, that's 44.6 recharge second time with my setup, and yeah, it's a long cooldown for such a short uptime. And that's kind of a similar story for the other ability that buffs damage in the American Worker specialization, and that is mixed armament synergy. What this does is, this one's a little confusing, is basically you activate this one and then you activate a type of weapon. So like activating, I activate this and then I trigger a cannon on this thing. So if I activate this and then I fire off my cannons, that means every other weapon type is going to be getting a buff. So if I fire off my cannons, that means any beams, torpedoes, or mines on my build will be getting a decent bonus damage buff. This one can be a little frustrating to use because it's not common to mix different weapon types onto your build. At most, I'm going to be using maybe 1 beam and 1 torpedo on a cannon build. Like actually, you can see that here. Like I've got mostly cannons, I got 1 torpedo, and I got 1 omni beam on this thing, and that's about it. So buffing those other weapon types really isn't going to be super beneficial. Ideally, what you would want to do is try to make sure that your beam fires off first. That way you can buff your cannons because you've got more of them on this build. But coordinating that can be difficult if you're just spamming all of your abilities and weapons at once. So this is something that you're going to want to do on like a more precise setup. And that's going to be kind of difficult to do in faster paced, high level content. So I feel like this mixed armament synergy, it's interesting, but it's difficult to get it to work exactly how you want it. And it's gotten to the point where I don't even bother using this on a lot of builds anymore. Like I really only use it when I just have extra space. Like here, I've got a lot of tactical seating here, so there's really not much else useful for me to throw in there. So that's the only reason it ended up on this build. But like on other builds, like my my Lexington, I don't even bother using this anymore. Because on top of the difficulties you have in getting it to buff the weapons that you actually want it to, it also only has a 10-second uptime and has a long recharge time, just like narrow sensor bands. Now, the other damage buff ability in this specialization is also a firing mode for the specialization. That is, energy weapons exceed rated limits. I just got disconnected. Hopefully the camera angle is similar to what it was before. Classic Star Trek Online experience. Anyway, exceed rated limits. What it does is it will give you a significant buff to your energy weapons firing cycle haste and also set your weapon power drain to 0, meaning that your weapon power will stay at its maximum point that you can get it to, which is pretty significant because when energy weapons fire, they're constantly draining your energy weapon power. So keeping that weapon power cost to 0 can be fairly beneficial, especially for weapons with a high power cost rate, like dual heavy cannons. But the trade-off with this ability is that while it is active, you will also receive some electrical damage over time, and you will receive a persistent drain to all of your power levels over time while this is active. So you're technically not getting the constant weapon power drain with your weapons, but your weapon power as well as your other power levels will gradually decrease while this is active. So it's a little bit of a win-lose situation. The other big disappointment here is that the actual haste buff really isn't that powerful when you compare it to the other energy weapon firing modes. Like here we go. Here's the level 3 version, which gives you a 100% buff to firing cycle haste, which, you know, on paper sounds really good, but let's compare that to another firing mode. This is Reroute Reserves to Weapons. This is the firing mode from the pilot specialization. As you can see, the level 3 version of this one gives a whopping 225% firing cycle haste. That is massively more powerful than exceed rated limits, and it also doesn't require you to electrocute yourself or drain your power. This one also even sets your weapon power cost to 0 too, so like what's the point of exceed rated limits when you compare it to this? I've said this for a while now. Exceed rated limits needs a massive overhaul. They just need to completely rework this ability because it has no identity of its own. It's literally just a crappier version of reroute reserves to weapons. Frankly, what I think they need to do with this thing is make it into a multi-targeting firing mode. Make it a little bit more like cannon scatter volley or fire at will, because none of the specialization firing modes do that. All of them are single target firing modes. And as I have said many times on this channel, single target firing modes are boring. But yeah, I think it would be a good way to set exceed rated limits apart from the other specialization firing modes. But that's just me. Miracle Worker also has a couple of abilities that will deal direct damage to enemy targets. The first one is Destabilize Warp Core. What this does is it will target an enemy and apply a radiation damage over time effect onto that enemy. So you'll deal a little bit of radiation damage to them, which will ignore shields. But if that target dies before the 15 seconds are up, its Warp Core breach will be enhanced, dealing an extra amount of kinetic damage in a larger radius. So with this thing, you want to have access to like Gravity Well and then use it, and then you can just kind of set off an enhanced Warp Core breach by killing that target, damaging more enemies in that radius within it. It's interesting. It's not super powerful. I kind of wish it would deal more kinetic damage and maybe increase the radius a little bit, but it's okay. This is one of those things where, like, if you have some extra space for Miracle Worker, you can throw this on too. But yeah, this is not something I would heavily rely on. The other ability is Overwhelm Power Regulators. What this does is it targets up to 5 foes within a 4-kilometer radius of you, and it will lower their power levels over the course of 10 seconds, as well as have a chance to completely disable one of those subsystems, and will also deal some electrical damage over time. It's not a lot of electrical damage, and really lowering power levels in a PvE setting really isn't that valuable, though this could be kind of valuable in a PvP setting because lowering power levels and possibly disabling those power levels can be kind of helpful, but those are also really easily overcome by just using emergency power abilities. So I don't know how valuable this would be in a PvP setting, but it does seem to be more targeted for use in a PvP setting. I guess this one's really more of a debuffer than a damage dealer, but it still works in the same category anyway. And there aren't a lot of other debuffer abilities in the specialization, so I didn't want to dedicate a category to that. Anyway, next are the healing abilities. The first is Aligned Shield Frequencies. This is an AoE shield heal, so it'll heal you and up to 5 allies within a 4-kilometer radius of you. It'll buff their shield regeneration and their shield resistance. It's not a particularly powerful shield heal. Mainly, the main use for this thing, in my opinion, is to trigger certain starship traits that, you know, trigger off of you being able to heal friendly targets. And it's also really useful on, like, you know, high-end tank builds or support builds that are meant to draw aggro, because healing multiple friendly targets at once is a really good way to generate threat. So if you're running like a high-end tank build, this can be pretty valuable for keeping attention on you rather than your teammates. So if you're running that sort of build, this can be kind of helpful just for the sake of generating threat. The next heal is Reroute Shields to Hull Containment. What this does is set your shields and your shield power to 0, and then based off of the percentage of shields you had while they were active, it will then give you some hull heals. Mainly, it'll give you bonuses to all damage resistance rating for your hull, maximum hull points, and hull regeneration. We've long joked that, you know, shields aren't that useful, but honestly, this isn't that great either, honestly, because one, the heal, it's meant to last for a certain amount of time, but it only lasts for a maximum of 10 seconds, and odds are your shields aren't going to be that highly active when you do activate this, so you're going to get even less time out of that when you activate it, so it's not going to be super effective. And really, shields have been kind of making a comeback over the past few years, like just alone by having the I don't have it on this build, the shield absorptive frequency, this thing off of the tier 3 Valdor. Ever since they unbound this thing, shields have been making kind of a comeback, because the amount of shield generation you can get out of this passive console, it's kind of crazy. So honestly, I don't know if I'd be wanting to just eliminate my shields entirely with that ability. And there are plenty of other ways to achieve hull heals, so I wouldn't worry about that one too much as a heal. The last Miracle Worker heal is a little weird because technically it's also a torpedo firing mode. This is Nanite Repair Payload. When you activate it, you will receive some heals, but it'll also ready your next torpedo to be able to be fired at a friendly target and then heal that friendly target with the impact. So you activate the ability, then it, you know, readies the torpedo to fire it, and while it's readied, you'll be receiving a short heal over time. It's not very powerful, but so like over the next 5 seconds, you'll receive some hit points, and then when it's fired, that friendly ally will receive 1 hit of heals too. So it won't be as powerful as the total overtime effect too. But yeah, it's interesting. I've never seen anyone actually use this ability, honestly. Like the heals aren't that powerful both to you or your friendly target. Like look, this is the level 3 version and you're only getting like a 9,000 hit points out of this. Though of course that'll probably go up if you're actually like more spec'd in like hull heals. So maybe that's why, because like my skill tree isn't that well suited for healing effects. So maybe it would go up if you are respected in a different way than I am on your skill tree, but I still can't imagine this thing being I'm pointing at the wrong one. I still can't imagine Nana repair payload being all that useful, especially because it's literally taking away your torpedo as well. The only time I can see this being kind of useful is if you're in a super high-end support build and you're wanting to deal as little damage as possible as to not take damage away from the DPSers. This is something you're only going to be doing in like a super high-end run where you're trying to beat the DPS leaderboards. So this is something that most players probably aren't going to bother with. Now, the last two Miracle Worker abilities are control abilities. The first one is deploy Gravitic Induction Platform. When you hit this, this will deploy a platform that will do a number of different things, one of which is an AoE pull effect. So anything within 5 kilometers will of the platform will receive some sort of pull effect. Not a very strong pull, but it's still a pull, which that's where the control effect comes in. This will also reveal any cloaked ships and disable pilot maneuvers of anything within range of that. And anything being affected by the pull effect will have their shields debuffed a bit, meaning that they will receive additional shield bleed through, which will increase as they are closer to the platform. So it'll make their shields a little bit less effective, but it'll also apply a pull and decloak, as well as disabling pilot maneuvers. So it'll be a little bit more difficult for smaller pilot ships to get away, but that's really something you're only going to encounter in PvP. And I can't imagine people in PvP using this because it's a targetable platform. They'll just blow up the platform. It's not that difficult. The last control ability and last Miracle Worker ability overall is Null Pointer Flood. What this is a confuse and placate ability. This has a guaranteed effect to confuse any nearby enemy targetable torpedoes and mines and smaller pets. So anything like fighters or shuttles. It'll guarantee to confuse and placate them. But for enemy starships, it only has a small percentage to actually apply that confuse or placate. In addition, the confuse and placate will only last for a certain amount of seconds, depending on what level you're using. The level 3 version lasts for just under 10 seconds, but it'll also be cut short if you have been able to deal more than 20,000 damage to that target. So once you've done 20,000 damage to the target, then the effect is over, which is kind of lame because especially for higher end builds, it's really easy to deal 20,000 damage in less than 10 seconds. So that is a very poor ability. Now, the big issue with both of these control abilities, that's Null Pointer Flood and Deploy Gravitic Induction Platform, they are both control abilities, meaning that they should trigger the personal trait Unconventional Systems. If you're unfamiliar with Unconventional Systems, this is a personal trait, which is very valuable. It's very powerful. What it does is it lowers the cooldown of your universal consoles every time you use a control ability, meaning the more control abilities that you use, the lower the cooldowns of your universal consoles, meaning the faster you'll be able to use said consoles, which, I mean, your universal consoles can potentially be very powerful. So the faster you can use them again, the more powerful your build is overall. Now, it says every time you use a control ability, Bridge Officer, on the tooltip, but that's not totally true. There are certain control abilities that do not trigger Unconventional Systems, and that does include the Miracle Worker control abilities. I don't know why they've never bothered to update these. They really should. It would actually go a long way to making Miracle Worker more desirable, because that's been one of the biggest weaknesses for Miracle Worker for a long time. Its complete lack of Unconventional System triggers. It's never made sense to me, given the fact that Miracle Worker has 2 control abilities, so they should trigger Unconventional Systems, but they don't for whatever reason. So that is all of the Bridge Officer seating from the Miracle Worker specialization. And if you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed that a lot of it is kind of lackluster. Like, some of the more powerful abilities like narrow sensor bands or mixed armament synergy have some serious drawbacks in the form of like mixed armament is difficult to actually get the buff where you actually want it to. And both of them have pretty low uptimes and pretty long cooldowns. Even if you are using other means to lower your Bridge Officer cooldowns, they're still going to be longer than a lot of your other abilities. And then there's some of the other damage dealers like Destabilized Warp Core, which are okay, but it's not particularly powerful. The heals aren't really good as heals. The only one that's really of any use is aligned shield frequency, and that's really more useful for threat generation than an actual heal. And then the control effects don't even do the one thing that you want your control effects to do, trigger unconventional systems. So they're pointless. So having an excess of miracle worker seating like you do here on Achilles, which has a commander level miracle worker and a lieutenant commander miracle worker, it leaves you with like having an abundance of abilities that you really don't want to use all that badly. So double miracle worker seating is kind of like a bit of a curse on a ship, especially depending on which seat it's on. Like this would be even worse if this were a cruiser like the California class, because the California class not only has too much miracle worker seating, it also has too much engineering seating, which very problematic for that ship. Same with the Parliament. However, Miracle Worker does pair fairly well with some other specializations. Like if you look at Intel is really good for energy weapons thanks to override subsystem safeties. So like you throw on that along with narrow sensor bands, that can be pretty nice for buffing your energy weapons altogether. Plus, Intel has 3 different abilities that trigger unconventional systems. So that kind of helps make up for Miracle Worker's complete lack of uncon triggers. Temporal is in a similar position. It has 3 abilities that trigger uncon, so it can make up for Miracle Worker's complete lack of uncon triggers. Plus, with Temporal, you also get access to recursive shearing, which is a really great damage dealer on its own. Pilot is an okay pairing because at least you get access to 1 additional uncon trigger in the form of Clean Getaway, but doesn't have any abilities that I feel like complement the other Miracle Worker abilities particularly well. And then there's Command, which is quite a mixed bag because Command is really good for both support roles and for being used as a torpedo build platform. So as a support build, like aligned shield frequency would actually be pretty useful for a support build. You could argue that nanite repair payload could also be good for a support build. I would disagree, but you could argue it. But additionally, mixed armament synergy could also be pretty good for a torpedo build because with the torpedo build, you're only going to be using like torpedoes and mines at most. So if you can buff one or you can buff the other, and you're gonna have a pretty even spread of both of them too. So mixed armament synergy can actually be pretty useful on a full-fledged kinetic build if you're using torps and mines. But of course, the big drawback with pairing Command and Miracle Worker is that neither specialization has any abilities that trigger unconventional systems. Because Command, it actually makes sense because Command doesn't actually have any abilities that are control abilities. But Miracle Worker still has 2 control abilities, but for some reason don't trigger unconventional systems. It's just very odd. So to go over the pros and cons list as we close out this video. So pros, Miracle Worker can be pretty good for energy weapon builds, but that's mainly just because of narrow sensor bands. You get the extra console slot, which that's good for pretty much any build type because it's an extra console that can, depending on what console you're putting on there, that can be a very powerful thing. And you also get the extra plus 10 power bonuses to the ship, though that could be a good or bad thing depending on where those power bonuses are going. Now, for the cons list, of course, it has no abilities that trigger unconventional systems, even though it does have 2 control abilities, so those abilities should trigger unconventional systems. They just don't for whatever reason. It's got some okay damage buffs, but those buffs don't last very long, and they have long cooldowns, so keeping them up consistently isn't going to be great. The firing mode is literally just a crappier version of the pilot firing mode, so exceed rated limits just needs a complete rework. That's really just the whole story on that. The ship mechanic is not great. It's completely RNG based, so it's completely random, and none of the abilities are particularly powerful, though that does make a bit of sense considering that, like, you're also getting an extra console slot. So, like, balance-wise, I would feel like the ship mechanic kind of has to suck a little bit to make up for the very powerful effect of getting the extra console slot. And plus the extra power bonuses, too. The extra power bonuses aren't going to make as big of a difference as the console slot, but it is still something extra that other ships aren't going to have. So yeah, you kind of have to tone down the ship mechanic a little bit. So it's a con, but an understandable con. And then of course there's the bridge officer abilities themselves, a lot of which I would put into the con category. There's just a lot of them aren't very powerful, or they don't have good uptimes, and the lack of unconventional systems triggers. So it makes having a lot of Miracle Worker seating actually kind of a pain. So you're going to have to be relying on the base classes in order to fill those slots. And at the same time, it also makes having secondary Miracle Worker seating kind of a pain because then you're just kind of left with the lackluster bridge officer abilities without all of the pros that a Miracle Worker ship normally has, like the extra console slot or the extra power levels. The only real exception would be the Federation Hollow ship, which is for some reason getting the extra console slot despite only having a secondary American Worker ship, but again, it's a unique ship. It's not something. It's that one's going to be more of an exception to the rule because it's an event ship. So again, I wouldn't get accustomed to seeing that again, if ever. So for build types, Miracle Worker, fairly decent for energy weapon builds, like I said, because you got narrow sensor bands in there. The seating can be okay for torpedo builds because of mixed armament synergy, as long as you have enough command seating to mix in with that in order to get concentrate firepower. So it can be useful for torpedo builds just for the sake of that one ability. Support builds and tank builds, again, it can be kind of useful just for the sake of having aligned shield frequencies, because that's good for generating threat, but it's really just that one ability that's useful for it. And then science builds, I mean, the extra console slot is really good for science builds, but none of the bridge officer seating is of any use for science builds, especially because none of these abilities trigger unconventional systems. Like, yeah, it's got overwhelm power regulators and destabilized warp core, which do deal exotic damage types, but they're not particularly powerful. Like the main damage dealer out of destabilized warp core is going to be the extra kinetic damage you get out of the increased warp core breach. Frankly, I kind of wish they would change that to physical damage, because then that would scale with EPG, making this actually much more valuable for EPG builds. And overwhelm power regulators, the real show there is the power drain and the chance to disable subsystem powers, which really isn't going to be that valuable in a PvE setting. And PvP, that's really easy to overcome. So it's the electrical damage is just kind of like a little like, all right, here's a little bit of extra, but it's not going to be something you're going to be counting on. So yeah, that is Miracle Worker ships. They have some really unique features that I like, but at the same time, they've got some serious downsides that I really wish Star Trek Online would take the time to look at and kind of reevaluate. Like, because of all of the specializations, Miracle Worker and Temporal are the only two that have yet to get a revamp. And frankly, Temporal's in a pretty good spot, so Miracle Worker really needs it more. Hopefully that'll happen one day. I'm not going to hold my breath on it though, but you know, fingers crossed. Anyway, let me know what you guys think of Miracle Worker ships, or if you found this guide helpful, be sure to let me know down below in the comments. And while you're down there, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, become a channel member if you want additional channel perks. Check out the merch store down below. Check out the affiliate links in the pinned comment. If you are ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. Any of these really help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.